Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Finding Good podcast. My name is Brian Fretwell, and excited for the show we have today. Excited to have you all along. And I'll start with our bit of an intro for those that are new here. For the majority of human history, connection was a daily practice. But it wasn't just a practice to make us feel good, to find out about somebody's day. It was a survival necessity. How we showed up around the campfire, the story we shared about where the blueberries were found, how we found them, what strengths we used to find them, and every detail about our experience increased the chances that us and our tribe would survive. The challenge is, in more modern times, connection has become relegated into the soft skill category. Connection has been seen by far too many as a nice to have pleasantry that you get to experience when you have a good friend or when a team is just clicking really well. The problem with that is that that has created a loneliness epidemic in our country that has been very well articulated by the Surgeon General, or the former Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy. The impacts of connection cannot be understated. You are better off being a 15 cigarette a day smoker than you are being lonely. My name is Brian Fretwell, and for the last 5 years, I've been exploring different practices that help people lead to connection. What I've been looking for is, what is it that our brain is looking for? Like, why does our brain prioritize connection often over food and water? What are the things it's looking for? And how can we recreate that experience so that those negative effects of loneliness don't impact us? But more importantly, so that things like clarity, resilience, engagement, purpose, and confidence, all that are associated with connection, are things that we can develop on our own and with others on a daily basis. In today's podcast, we are focused on using this process and practices of connection to help create clarity. We look at connection as a byproduct, the thing that happens, the feeling seen, heard, and validated that happens when two individuals create clarity. Today, we're going to talk about a really specific practice that I'm excited about, that you don't think about often when you're thinking about connection, and that is feedback. Yeah, we're going to talk about feedback from the science standpoint, and then feedback with how we can get feedback through this process of providing clarity. I'm going to talk in the beginning about what are some of the limitations of how we approach feedback and how we engage with feedback in different people. And then we're going to have a conversation. Oh, is my mic muted? Sorry, I'm getting okay, that sounds like the mic is going. And then we're going to have a conversation about how we create it. I will see if I'm having, I'm going to check real quickly to see if I'm having, yep, it decided to switch microphones on me. So, all right. Are we better there? Right? Okay, good deal. I don't know why it switched microphones on me, but we're back. So what we're going to do is a couple of things. We have a fantastic guest today, Jen Haston, who has been using the Finding Good process for a while and has discovered a way of how engaging it has allowed her to get feedback that she might not have gotten before. I'm excited about it because that can be a very vulnerable conversation to have. Just identifying that I might need feedback, right? It can be a struggle. I know that it is a struggle for me. Prior to that conversation, Ren and I are going to have a little bit of a conversation about feedback and the science. Then we're going to jump on and talk to Jen about her connection practice and how it relates to feedback. And then we're going to open the doors to anybody that wants to jump on. We're going to have a Finding Good conversation with Jen, if that's okay, right? So they're always voluntary. And then anybody that is watching, I'm happy to give you the link. If you're watching on YouTube or the others, we should see your comments up here. If not, reach out and we will send you the link to get you live on stage if you'd like to have a live conversation, right? So I will copy that link right now and put it in the comments so those that have it can join at any time. If you join on stage, don't worry, nobody will see you, and I'm not going to bring you onto the actual stage unless you raise your hand and say it's okay. So with that, I'm going to bring Ren to stage. I like that. I give you a whole lot of warning. Like, I'm going to bring you to stage, like, right? So luckily I can kind of see you, so it's not a complete sarcasm. I'm going to catch somebody one day with like full finger in the nose kind of thing, or like picking something. Yeah, that's probably not the best way to create safety. But welcome, Ren. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, good. We talked earlier. I updated the website today, so I'm pumped. I'm excited. So for anybody that wants future, to be able to find these the future podcasts, we have the events on the findinggood.com page. But yeah, Ren, I know we didn't have a lot of time to talk about this one before, which is me doing more doing than planning, right? But what do you think about this idea of like where connection and feedback kind of play together or don't play together? Like when you think of it, because they, especially in how we approach finding good, it can feel like feedback, especially we have the rule, no SOFA, right? No suggestions, opinion, feedback, or advice. Yeah. And so I'm curious when you hear, this, like how connection interacts with feedback, what comes up for you? What do you think about?
Yeah, I think my initial thought on that is when you have strong connection, the feedback almost gives itself.
Yeah, tell me more, because I feel like you have some experience with that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that happens a lot, especially in in the workplace, a manager feels like they're walking on eggshells when they're giving feedback. And that's generally a big signal that that person who's receiving the feedback doesn't feel probably safe or feel seen, valued, heard. And the more we can connect, the more we can understand, like approach conversations with the desire to understand one another, the easier it is for the other person to see your perspective and naturally see your experience and naturally either inform you so that you can come together or create the solution because they're closest to the work anyway.
Yeah. And it's interesting when I think about that. And I like to ask you, because you have the, boots on the ground, having been the HR person for a lot and being required to do some of the feedback stuff. While I've had plenty of teams that I've managed, I've always had a bit of an issue with feedback. And the issue being, it is a completely overused term that is not anywhere near as impactful as people think it is. Feedback in general, and there were some studies that I was privy to when I was working with some of the other kind of neuroscience-based companies back in the day, that the majority of feedback in the neighborhood of like 70-80%, depending on what study you're looking for, leaves the relationship worse off than it started. And in that process, actually doesn't lead to the behavior change or the increase in performance or the change in behavior that we're looking for. Now, we all have experiences where feedback was really worked for us, where we needed the feedback in the moment, where feedback definitely benefited us from whatever we were struggling with. But I would put that likely in that 20% category. Yeah. And there's a couple of things that need to be in feedback, and I'm going to talk about those and then and use those kind of as a basis for when we kind of engage with Jen here in a second. And the two things, and I'm curious, I just with you on here, Ren, like I'm curious if you what are the two ingredients that have to go in feedback for it to actually lessen the possibility it's going to leave a negative impact. What do you think those are based on your experience? Because I kind of heard them in some of your answer just now.
Yeah, I mean, I think there needs to be some alignment between the two people, and that safety.
Yep.
What's the other one? I'm not sure what the other one would be.
Yeah, so alignment is a good start. The number one thing is that there needs to be an agreed upon thing that they're improving. So the person getting feedback and the person giving feedback have to have a clear agreement on what the person getting feedback actually wants, right? The goal has to be clear between the two, and that goal has to be something that the person getting feedback wants. What you often see is that the leader has a goal that's not clear to the other person. They're giving feedback on, and so now I'm getting feedback on completely different things, right? Or I have a goal that I haven't communicated, and now I'm asking for feedback, but with this person, we don't have clarity on what it is we're talking about. So that clarity piece is likely the most overlooked and perhaps biggest to start with. That's the obvious one, or more obvious one, which I think is right in what you said with alignment, right? The other one is not so obvious, if you will. It's not so straightforward. It's actually that the person receiving feedback needs to ask for it. Yeah. The person receiving feedback needs to ask for it. And this is something, again, I used to teach years ago. But when you think about that application, right, it's actually easy, even though it doesn't sound obvious, the person getting feedback needs to ask for it. It sounds counter to how we think about approaching it, but it's actually underlies why we approach feedback wrong so many times. Because and there's people in the audience here, but if you're listening to this, I just want to have you think about, if you were in the audience right now and I asked you to raise your hand if you really love unsolicited feedback, if you look forward to it, and how many people have an experience where somebody has just told them where they could improve, what they could do better, right? Even if it's well-intentioned, even if it's relatively positive, it will shift your brain into some degree of fight or flight. Because what's happened is we have this status disequilibrium where the person says, you need to improve this, which must mean I know more than you, right? And so being able to ask for it helps with that disequilibrium, right? Because I'm prepping, if I, hey, I need to improve here, so I'm giving you permission to do that. So now I don't have that jolt. But then in doing that, if we can make sure we have clarity, those are the things that allow feedback to happen, right? I just want to start that because I think I want to start the conversation around feedback as we're going to get with Jen and thinking about those two pieces, because I think they really overlay the idea of creating clarity, which is how we create connection, is that ultimately, feedback is really about getting clear on how to reach what I want to reach, right? But the breakdown in that is when we're unclear on what I want to reach, and then we're unclear on how I'm doing it, right? What I mean by that is the person sharing feedback is telling you something you've likely already tried, telling you to do something that's not in line with what you actually want to do. And all of that can be solved in some way through approaching clarity first, right? What do you think, Ren?
Yeah.
Fair enough outline of feedback to start the day?
Yeah.
Anything you want to add before we jump Jen on?
I mean, I think I would add a caution that even if someone has asked for feedback, chances are they have the answer already.
Yeah. I love that. I think bringing back that rule, don't give advice unless somebody's asked twice. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And it'll be interesting to see if that one comes on. So, Ren, I'm going to pull you off stage, pull Jen up. For those in the comments, Ren can help you get to where you need to go if you want to get on stage. And just periodically through them to remind people, if you want to come on stage, put a comment in there or go to the link that's already in there. Once the conversation with Jen and I wraps up, then we'll open it up to others to be able to engage find a good conversation. Awesome. See you back here shortly, Ren. All right, so now I'm going to invite to the stage Jen Haston. I think I'm pronouncing the name right. I just realized I said it earlier and I didn't check. But she's a coach, speaker, does a bunch of other things, who has been part of this process off and on for the last couple of years, and brought Jen on today because she reached out to have a conversation about this. And when we got on the phone, I had to stop the conversation because we started to get into how she's using it to get feedback and some of those things. And because we want these conversations to be, original, if you will, and not rehearsed, I had her stop abruptly and just join us today. So we bring Jen on stage to talk about feedback as it relates to connection and your specific connection practices. So Jen, how you doing?
I am doing really well, Brian. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good today. I got my microphone working. So
yeah, that's always a good thing.
Plus. Yeah. apparently my technology wants to pull it back to the other, but in anybody that's listened to prior podcasts, this will be a step up. But Jen, I take just a minute or two to introduce yourself, but specifically, or in introducing yourself, kind of outline like when you saw the podcast, when you were interested in reaching out for us to have a conversation, what was the practice that you were thinking about?
In thinking about that, the first thought I have is when we first encountered each other 3 years ago, and we talked about how you experienced joy and the connection I felt with my daughter because I stopped to connect with her instead of correcting her. And what actually drove me to looking around for something about connection is that I deeply feel the way that you do, is that it is lacking so sorely, in our world. Like we need connection more than we need water. We need connection so badly. And it's just so many people don't have the first inkling of how to get it. They think that they're connecting, they're talking to someone, they feel like their message is getting across. And then in other conversations, subsequent conversations, you find out, oh, they had no idea what I was saying at all. And that's monumentally frustrating.
And I'd like to pull back and just kind of like the idea of like when we say they, we mean we sometimes, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Even, like the idea of like, okay, I'm creating connection here. If it's not intentional, then it doesn't happen, which is part of the practice part that we'll talk about in a little bit. But also, I think we have some like really ingrained ideas of what connection is and what it's for. And so a lot of this podcast is really to help people see it more in that survival kind of perspective, to raise the importance so that then practicing connection, like being more intentional about it isn't just so that I can feel good around friends or not be as awkward in parties, but to see it as the actual like advantage that it is and the survival necessity that it is. So tell me about if we jump right into it, like the practice you have around, using connection to like, as we talked on the phone, talked about, you getting, or I don't know if it was getting feedback or like being open to feedback through connection that maybe you weren't before, which I'll say right out of the gate, just offering that up to be like, here's how connection taught me what the hell I was doing wrong is joy to tell. Right. So and that's what got me excited to have you on, is because like, okay, how do we generally focus on how do we give others feedback, but you've been using connection like a practice of connection to give you feedback that you might not have known was there, or right, that that you wanted in the first place. So yeah, tell me a bit about that.
Well, I think the first relationship I want to touch on is the one with my partner, because that is a feedback relationship where you have a constant loop, where it's like, hey, this thing happened and I didn't love the way that happened and I didn't like how I showed up. So can I show up again that way? We have a thing in our house called retake. Coming from a theater background, it's like retake. Let me go back to that moment. I don't like how I showed up there. I was more about me than you. What do you need in this moment? And my partner and I have a practice that we do every day, which is what's on your heart and mind today. And what do you need? And sometimes that can lead to some really good conversations, because it's like, I feel like I'm really struggling this week. I need to make sure you're going to take care of this for me. And can you do this? And it's like, yeah, And then the other day, this is really interesting. We were talking about the fact that I had done something, because it's the sponge problem, if you know what I'm talking about, where they notice when you leave the sponge in the sink.
Right.
But when you don't do it, there's no impetus for them to say, hey, good job not leaving that sponge in the sink, right? And I don't walk around needing that kind of praise, but if it's something that actually annoys you to the point that you say something to me about every time you see it, it's like, I'd like the other side of that. So, and how that leads to connection is that it's never about the sponge. It's about something else. It's never about the sponge.
Yeah. Can I engage that a little bit? Because
Yes.
there's one of the parts when I think about the find a good process and connection, that what I'm hearing is like, we have a tendency, just as you outlined there, we have this tendency to be like, what am I not doing for you? What am I not, and then what are you not doing for me? And specifically when you said, noticing the sponge, right? And that like, we wouldn't necessarily expect to tell the other person each time, right? Like, good job, you did it. And this is where, this is just an avenue that I think, like, exploring this, like, what is a sponge a real thing? Number one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actual example. I'm not making it up. It's not metaphorical.
Yeah. So here's a question, and this is kind of a finding good oriented question, just so everybody knows. This is kind of leaning into the practice as we're outlining different practices for feedback. Like, we can get into this pattern of like, what do we need from each other, which is good. Before that, there's a level of like, here's what you're not doing, here's what I'm not doing, here's where I'm falling short. Then here's what we need for each other. The question I would want to ask for you, because I'm assuming you're the person annoyed about the sponge.
Nope, it's him.
Oh, the other way around. Okay, so then I'm going to approach this almost as him, if you will, right? If that's all right. Yeah. So can you think of the last time that you didn't leave the sponge there?
Last night.
Okay, you didn't leave the sponge there last night, right?
No.
What changed?
I was thinking about it. I was being intentional about it because I know it bothers him. And so I was
walk me through it. Did you use the sponge to do dishes or whichever that night?
I did, because he's acts of service. And so doing the dishes, I hate doing the dishes, but it's something that he really enjoys when I do it for him. So I do it for him. And the household needs dishes to be cleaned, obviously.
Yeah.
And mine is words of affirmation. So
what was it, a conscious choice for you to then, like, can you remember, like I was washing, and then like when you decided to actually like put the
yes, I do remember going, don't leave the sponge in the sink.
Don't leave the sponge in the thing. And then what did you do with the sponge?
I put it in the back corner of behind the faucet.
So. Yeah. And now for those listening, this can likely feel like, what the hell is he like? Why are we walking through the details of the sponge? But it's actually to get this question. When you put it in that other place, in that moment, how did it actually feel?
Good, because I knew he was going to appreciate it.
And what did it, so you knew he would feel good. What do you think that said about, what did you want that to say about who you are?
I care about you, and I'm being intentional about something that bothers you.
So if I don't know what process allows you to do the thing that I want you to do, right? Then I can't reward you when you do it. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah. I think about a similar one with my wife and I. My wife hates putting dishes away. Right? She's going to listen to this and get annoyed that I said that out loud, but she does not like it. And we've had different discussions around it, but like, it is not like doing the dishes is fine. It could, like, we have different chores, if you will, but like, she has her little tricks of like doing everything she can to talk me into doing the dishes. Now, for a long time, that was really around like, me getting annoyed, like, kind of, all the fun thoughts that roll in your head about your spouse, like grow up, what's wrong with you? Like, all of it, I'll admit that I've had, those. But what what we found is that, like, as I explored it, one time I was able to put the dishes away and realize, oh, this is an act of service. Like, this is something I get to do for her.
Yeah.
But if she doesn't know I'm making that choice, and to your point, it's not that I need validation. I don't need her to say, oh, thank you for doing that for me, right? But if she understands that, then we both get to enjoy that more. If that enjoyment isn't, like, if that thing that I'm doing isn't clear to her why I'm doing it, then where is the feedback that I'll receive, positive or negative? When she says, would you do this? When the non-acknowledgement becomes the acknowledgement.
Right.
And now I've done 3 or 4 things, just like putting away the sponge 3 or 4 times is extra effort for you. You're doing it to be a good person. And then the only time you hear about it is when you didn't do it. Eventually that behavior will go away.
Yeah.
And so when you think about that in terms of feedback, like to put that in your control, what is the behavior that he does?
You're talking about in this situation, or?
No. Like, you leave we all have them, like, my wife doesn't like to do dishes. I don't pick up anything. Like, I do. No, there are piles of Brian around the house. She used to take pictures.
There are piles of Jeremy around the house.
So yeah.
I'm your wife in that situation, I guess.
There you go. Now, can you think about the last time that that you walked in the house and there was a one less pile, or the pile, like, he picked up the piles?
Yeah.
And here's the question that I hope kind of annoys you a little bit, right? Do you know how that happened?
He had to take effort and be intentional because it doesn't come naturally to him.
Do you know that because he told you?
No, of course not.
Yeah. So that's this assumption that keeps us from having the clarity we need, right? Like,
yeah.
And so if we think about, how we talked about feedback earlier, clear and agreed upon goal, right? And then asking for feedback, right? He may not know picking up the things is your goal, which is a whole other discussion.
Yeah.
Picking up the thing isn't the goal. What is the actual goal for you?
Cleanliness. Clutter-free. Yeah. I can't stand clutter. It makes me anxious. So
yeah, and so here's where we get a little bit of clarity in here that can actually help us with the communication. So you can't think when things are cluttered. Is that what I just heard? Mm-hmm. What can you do more of?
Stress.
When things are cleaned up.
Oh, when they're cleaned up, I can think clearer. I can be more present because I'm not worried about the visual noise that's around.
Yeah, you can think clearer and be present because you're not thinking about that. What are you thinking about?
I'm thinking about, you're talking about when the clutter is clear?
Yep.
When the clutter is clear, I'm able to think about our relationship. I'm able to think about our connection. I'm able to think about other things and not just...
Yeah. So it allows you to be able to focus on what's important, what matters, to think clearly. And then here's another jerk kind of question. When you talk to him about picking stuff up on the floor, do you talk about, like, how he hasn't picked up on the floor and how the floor is a mess? Or do you talk about, hey, how can we create an environment where I can think clearer, when I can be more present, and where I can focus on the things, and then we can focus on the things we need to?
Yeah, it would be that first one because I'm also a jerk.
And it's not.
I know, but still.
Yeah. Well, it's actually like, this is where I think connection goes in, and right now we've kind of done 2 explorations, right? The sponge on there, and then just in this clarity. the thing that we take for granted is that, like, it wasn't, you're communicating what you're clear on. You're clear that this annoys me, that these piles are in the way, that this is here. But without our conversation, without somebody saying, like, why does that matter? What do you have more of? Like, notice even in the first couple of times I asked you, you said, well, I'm, like the first time I asked you, you're like stressed because your brain went naturally into, oh, they're asking why I'm annoyed. And I'm really clear on why I'm annoyed, because our brain prioritizes that, right? I need to know where the bear is a whole lot more than I need to know where the resources are, right?
Yes.
And so our brain says, I'm really clear on what I'm annoyed, what we need help with, where connection comes in is clarifying what we actually want. And so and it's really easy to hear that feedback thing when we say, let's get clear on this shared goal. It's easy for us to believe the shared goal in this case is clothes aren't on the floor. Or in your husband's sake, the shared goal is the sponge isn't there. Or in a work context, the shared goal is you don't do this, or you're doing more of this. But the clarity of that goal is when it really becomes shared.
Yeah.
That when you both understand that actually it's not net, like the clothes are one part of me wanting to be more present, me needing to be more focused, me being able to think clearly.
Mm-hmm.
And I would even bet that if you talk to him about the sponge, right?
Yeah.
And what he has when the sponge is put away, that you're likely going to actually see similarities in what you're talking about too.
Yeah.
That both the sponge and the clothes represent this opportunity for you two to create more presence and more focus and more, right, presence together.
Yeah.
How does that change how that looks at that?
It feels like a whole lot of curiosity. And like, what can we do as a team? And it's super collaborative, which works for work as well as couplehood. How can we be collaborative in this moment instead of me saying you're doing this wrong? So
yeah, and it's not easy. I mean, I think about it in my own. Like, I can think about times just in the last 2 weeks where I've been like, why don't you do the damn dishes? And I can picture in my head the look on her face of like, oh, there's another pile of brine laying around the house, right? The challenge is being able to switch that into, like, when I look at that, like saying, okay, here's an opportunity for me to make things easier for Jamie, right?
Yeah.
And that, like, and then even being able to communicate that again, which sounds like I'm not asking for validation, but being able to say, I put these away in hopes to make your day better.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that so that, like, I get the validation necessarily. I mean, I want a little bit.
Sure,
right?
we all like validation.
I need the points.
Let's be honest. You want the points. You always want the points.
But that allows me to communicate, I did this for you because you're worth doing stuff for.
Yeah.
Right? And to be able to create that, like, hey, we're in this together, to be able to create, like, our job together is actually making things easier for each other, allowing each other to be better, to push each other in that sort of thing. Our job isn't to parent each other.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
So tell me about this other. So you had that was one, and then there was another kind of feedback area that we had talked about.
Oh yes, the work situation where as an extrovert, I think it's pretty clear, anybody listening can tell that I'm an extroverted person. Mm-hmm. Whenever you're in a work environment and you're the first one to speak up, always, that doesn't leave a lot of space for other work types. It doesn't leave a lot of space for other people to have their ideas spoken about or considered. And I had a friend of mine talk to me about how sometimes my optimism doesn't consider ramifications.
Mm-hmm.
And she was very nice about it, but she said, I know this is going to offend you. I'm like, no, it actually doesn't. It's a very insightful observation. I don't know what to do with it. But this is where I'm at right now. So.
And so I'm gonna do a little break. I should have done this before we shifted here because I'm just noticing the time. So Jen and I are gonna have another conversation, but for anybody listening, this is a Finding Good or Finding Blueberries podcast, and it's a live podcast. And there's some people I can see in the audience and on stage. Once Jen and I are wrapped up here in about 10 minutes, there's open invitation for any guest to join us. So if you'd like to join us, there's a link in the comments there that you see right there on the screen. You can click on that link. It will send you into the room. You'll see a bunch of pictures, but that doesn't mean anybody else sees you but me. If you'd like to jump in and have a conversation just like the one Jen and I just had, we call them Finding Good Conversations. You don't even need a topic, or you can come and share a challenge, whichever the case is. Jump in and say hi. You can raise your hand or send me a private chat or send in the comments if you would like to engage in the conversation. So just, at any time, Ren will be watching those. But if you want to have that conversation, let us know so we can pull you right on stage at the end of this. So right back at it, Jen. So so this person shared, like, this is going to make you mad, right? And you said it didn't make you mad. Like, we don't actually have to talk about what the feedback was on.
Yes, because I was explaining a situation where I did not handle something well, and that's super fun to talk about publicly. So great for me to bring that up.
Right.
But I didn't want to hurt one person's feelings, so I didn't go out of my way to explain all the details, which I'm not going to do now. But I was a jerk because I didn't handle it in the most clear way possible, right? And what I should have done is made the boundary really clear and said, you need to take this up with another person, not me. I'm not able to be the intermediary here. And
I'm just clarifying, was the feedback on the fact that you didn't do that, or was it you got feedback because you didn't do that?
I got feedback because I didn't do that, because I was talking to my friends about how upset I was about the situation. And they said, well, I love you, Jen. And your optimism doesn't always consider ramifications. And I went, I'd be offended by that, but I think that's pretty accurate. And I think sometimes that is the case. That's when I get so excited and I rush into something headlong. And then I go, wait a second. I need to rethink this because my optimism carries me away, and sometimes I'm just like, this is all going to work out for the best. And it absolutely didn't. And there are ramifications. So, but yeah.
And so you got, in this case, like this unsolicited feedback, right?
Yes.
And that was it the boundary, you wanted to create a boundary so that didn't happen, or you got the feedback that boundary was because you didn't do that before, and that's where the feedback came from?
This is a friend who we have kind of a rule of, I'm going to give you unsolicited advice, right? So if you want it, great. If not, it's not going to offend me if you don't take it. But I was explaining the situation and I was saying, am I the jerk? And it was just like, yeah, you're the jerk here because you didn't do, what you should have done. And it's like,
so you did the ask for it part.
I did ask for it. Yes.
And this is one of my favorite, because you asked for it, but did you actually want it?
I really did. I really
did.
Yeah, I really did in that situation, because I was really obsessing over it. And I needed some outside opinion. Be like, hey, what do you think? And then it allowed me to see it a little bit more clearly. So there's two things in there that I think worth exploring on the Finding Good part is, number one, what was it that you did in that relationship? And I heard one or two things already, but what are the things that you did that made you more open to that feedback? You mean from the friend who gives unsolicited feedback, we have an agreement about it?
Yeah. Because I can say that. I've heard people say that, and it's bullshit, right? You could tell me anything, and just as they say it, like, no, I can't. I am fully aware that, like, you think I can tell you anything, but that is absolutely not the case.
Well,
what is
this
it that
particular
you
friend, this particular friend, we have that relationship.
Yeah, and that's what I'm asking about. What did you do to create that?
Years of confiding in each other. We used to work together. We have a deep relationship, probably 15 years.
Yeah.
So it's time, it's energy, it's a complete and utter BS detector. You know, like, hey,
Yeah,
you're not really being true with yourself. Like, I don't know why you think that I'm going to buy that, but that's not what's going on here. So maybe think about that again. So,
and I'm looking for the actual, like, strength that
okay.
you had to. So you said you built it over time, and what happens is we start to say, oh, it just naturally happened because we hung out together for 15 years, right?
Right.
But, like, what is the action?
Being there.
When you think about the times that you've gotten feedback, if you can think about another big feedback time, what did you have to do to allow it?
Oh, I had to be vulnerable. I had to be willing to ask for it and mean that I wanted it.
Yeah. And what is that recipe? So, like, I hear people say, I need to be vulnerable, but there is times that I'm willing to be vulnerable and not. And, like, I'm wondering for you, like, when you're able to get feedback, what are you doing to allow yourself to be vulnerable?
Opening myself up to the possibility I'm going to hear something I don't want to hear.
Yeah, I'm going to lean into that. What do you mean opening yourself up?
Not being so convinced that I have all the answers.
Okay, so not being convinced that I have the answers. So if I'm not doing that, what are you doing more?
I'm really curious about what I am doing. I'm really curious about how it's coming across.
Yeah. Now when you think about, like, we're pulling it back to this instance.
Yes.
How did curiosity show up in this instance? How were you able to lean on curiosity this time?
I was curious about when it blew up in my face. I knew I had done something wrong. But before that, I had the idea that this is probably not going to go well, but I'm going to try it anyway.
Yeah. So what was the thing you were curious about then?
I was curious if I had been just cleaner with the way I approached it, more honest with the way I had approached it, like if that would have made a difference.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing in that is I was curious about what could happen.
Right.
Yeah. And that's that sort of, like, positive curiosity that starts to engage, because now you frame that feedback.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm curious about what is possible.
Yeah.
Then I'm more open to feedback, because in that curiosity, I'm validating what already is. If I'm curious in a more binary way, if I can do it or not, how does that change that same feedback? You did that wrong.
One way or the other is wrong. And
so it either goes into the box of I can't do it or I can.
Yeah.
And if it's going into those boxes, it's either an echo chamber or garbage, right? Yeah. And so that, like, so as we look at that from the practice of finding good, that feedback is available with vulnerability, but the real clarity in there is a vulnerability is available with the right kind of curiosity for you.
Yeah.
And so, like, for me, the clarity in that is, how do I, when I'm trying to improve something, how can I approach with curiosity? And I'm curious, when you think about that, how that might change how you approach feedback in the future.
Wow. I'm just thinking about it. That is a game changer.
And what's interesting is it's what you're already doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think this is what happens. I don't think like this is, as we talk about in this podcast, this is what connection creates. It's this of like the journey towards clarity is about like uncovering something that's already happening.
Yeah.
Like curiosity wasn't something that I planted, right? It was like, it wasn't my idea, my opinion or advice. It was actually like just getting into the root of you saying, oh, I'm open to feedback. And then naturally saying from there, like, oh, because I hung out with somebody for 15 years and you naturally do that bullshit. but then that's our brain's way of just saying like, oh yeah, no, it just kind of happens. But then you get underneath that, like, oh, okay, nope, I had to be vulnerable. And that was a big, like, kind of, oh, the vulnerability is necessary. But then even underneath that vulnerability, there was this trigger mechanism, right?
Yeah.
And I think why that's important is that like on our own, that kind of clarity is difficult.
Agreed.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, because my brain is going to be like, oh, it's just because of so and so, and we have this great relationship, and I can talk to them about anything, and not see that actually there are a whole lot of things that I'm doing in this relationship that allows that to happen. And the more clarity I get on what I'm doing in this relationship that allows that to happen, then I can bring that into other relationships. Right.
Yeah.
And you can almost make some overlap between that curiosity and how does that curiosity show up in that first conversation we had, right?
Yeah. Jeremy's going to be really happy.
Well, because what can we do together is a fun question to engage with someone.
Yeah.
Like, how can we create this life we want together?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Takes a little work and it's not easy. I'm going to pull Ren up here, but I'm going to reach out to the audience. So I just want to pull Ren. I kind of give some reflection on what I heard in the conversation. I'd love to hear Ren's perspective on the conversation. But if you'd like to come up on stage and chat about what you heard and or have me engage you in a finding good discussion, I would love to have you on here. Again, you can hit the link right here. It'll bring you right in on stage. I won't put you in front of the group until you raise your hand, so don't worry about being done unannounced. I only do that to Ren mostly. But yeah, if you'd like to engage, open, the phones are open. How about, right? Ren, I'm curious, what's your reflection on this conversation? So we had two finding good conversations there with Jen, but yeah, what insights did you have? What did you, what was your experience with the conversation?
Yeah, I think the one thing that struck me is I think somewhere early, like maybe the first third of the conversation, Jen, I think you even said something to the effect of being able to see it through someone else's viewpoint, vantage point, let me see it more clearly. And that really is where we ended the conversation. So it's almost like you forgot that you knew it, or forgot like how powerful that is, I guess, maybe is more, more to yeah. Yeah.
How's that sit, Jen? You forgot that you knew it. How do you make sense of that?
I think it's easy to forget it, that you know it when you're in the thick of it and you're trying to remember. And emotions are high, like you were saying before. Like when emotions are high, it's kind of hard to get anything else through. So it's really helpful to be reminded, you know how to do this. You've done this before. It's been replicated many, many times. And you just need a reminder that you know how to do this.
Yeah. And that reminder is that validation we talked about before, right? That's that piece of like, for me, like telling my wife, like, hey, I did this for you. Is sending a feedback loop for myself of like, hey, I'm actually being a decent person right now. And I'm doing this because I care and love this person. And now I'm creating a kind of a stronger, a neural connection there. So that when I see it, the first thing I'm thinking about is the ability to do that, not the annoyance, right? And but if that kind of, if you will, neural network, if that pathway is not being reinforced, we kind of forget it.
Mm-hmm.
And then even worse than that, because it's something you naturally do well, you don't see it. Yeah. And what I love about these conversations is, like, through the week, I would love to have you reach out and be like, hey, curiosity is showing up here and here, because now it's just more in your kind of executive functioning. It's more in your out of the periphery and more into the actual, right in front of you. You're going to be able to access it and use it more. Yeah. And Ren and Ken and other people watching, myself included, will also be able to use that more. Because in listening to that story, we're thinking of, like, how can I reframe this as curiosity? How can I approach more curiously so that I can be vulnerable, so that I can be open to the feedback that people are wrong about? Sorry, that's my bias in there. Working on it. All right. Ken has a question, so I'm gonna have Jen and Ren step back for a bit, give Ren some introvert time to recharge there, but and then have a conversation with Ken and whoever else might jump up on the stage today. The rest of the day is about engaging in the finding good conversation. That could start with just a general question. It could start with you sharing a challenge or a goal, or if you don't know what you want to share, but you just want me to start off with some questions, I am happy to do that all day long. We call the process Finding Good. It's reflective of what we've done for years around the campfire. And Ken has a bit of a question about the idea of feedback in the workplace. Yeah, tell me about tell me about the question.
So if we're doing the feedback like you're just talking through, and how do we set expectations and the tone in a annual assessment where we're now, this is a conversation where feedback is expected universally. This is our one time per year if we didn't do semi-annual, right? And most folks are not doing, ad hoc feedback and the like. So this is, all of this pressure is put into this one conversation a year where I'm now going to find out if I'm getting a raise or not. And I'm also going to get my feedback. Not optimal, but this is kind of what the industry standard is. So what is a way to make this more productive and helpful? And I guess this would be a conversation for both sides of the desk, being employee and supervisor. How do you make this better based on what you just talked about?
So I have two things on this. The first is your microphone on? Is Ren, raise your hand if Ken was quiet for you too. Yeah. Okay.
All right, let's try this now. Is that any better?
There it is. There it goes.
Okay,
Much better.
Excellent. I had forgotten. I thought that it was on here. So
yeah, no worries. Yeah. So just to kind of rephrase, I think these are annual assessments, right? That we're talking about. To make it more to stay in line with the show, which is me not providing suggestions, opinion, feedback, or advice, even though that's going to happen, right? Happened with Jen and all of this. But to actually go into, like, when you think about this, are you thinking about it as it relates to when you were a manager or when you were on the receiving end?
I thought of, I just natural or not natural. I was thinking about it from both sides. I've had both experiences, and it's easy to go, well, all right. So I guess it's for the purpose of the conversation. If we say, let's talk about me as the one getting the feedback, because that at least I can control more so than the other side of the table.
So right, tell me the conversation. Yeah, tell me the feedback conversation that actually made you think there's got to be a better way to do this.
Well, for me, I'm actually, because my last few supervisors, I've actually been very blessed with supervisors. And so it is more of a good conversation. And I'm
Yeah.
not hating it. So a
And
hating conversation needs to go back quite a distance. And
so this is actually like this is really fun, if you will. And so I'm engaging in, like the finding good discussion here. Like you have a little bit of the answer you're looking for already, right? And what I mean by that is like these, as you outline them, what keeps them from happening is partly like, what are the things, because you said you had managers before that those conversations, paraphrasing, didn't totally suck, right? But like were actually pretty positive. What were the things that were happening what were the things that they were doing and maybe you were doing that allowed those conversations to be better?
Demonstrated throughout the year that we could communicate.
Yeah. So how did that happen? What was one of the demonstrations?
The tone on a regular basis of just being able to talk, of whether things are going good or bad. And this is still work related, is what I'm thinking, is just being able to have candid conversations.
Can you think about one of those conversations with your last manager that you had a good relationship?
Yeah. Okay.
What was it that you did prior to that conversation that allowed it to be candid?
I think coming in to the conversation with kind of a heart posture of just, this is gonna, hey, this is what's going on. Let's chat about this, and not coming in with and being in a defensive position or putting a lot of weight and burden on the conversation.
And how did you send that message to him or them? Sorry.
In this case, it's a him. By just kind of joking and coming in and kind of cutting up, kind of just a lighter attitude.
So there was a message that like, we can play here, we can engage here, that you consciously actually like reached into. Do you know why you did that?
Because I've always found that to make for easier conversations, and it's more enjoyable for me.
Is that like an empathy thing? Is it an intuitive thing? What do you think?
Probably intuitive. I've certainly learned that if we can joke about things, even serious things, then it's a little bit easier to live life together. We can have some fun.
So would it be fair to say here, like one of the ingredients that you had for being able to create this relationship was actually like humor and openness?
Yes.
Yeah. And just to kind of explore the other side, what were some of the things that he did to make those meetings, to have that relationship that you just talked about?
So an interesting one that comes to mind is just the physical structure of the room, where there were two supervisors in there. So I wouldn't necessarily be across the desk from him, because we'd have a desk in the corner, or a table in the corner. So it would be more sitting next to versus across the table, and a more rigid power structure, if you will.
Do you think he did that on purpose?
This particular room is it was the only way this room would allow for the setup that was in there. So that may have just been circumstance, but it's
Yeah.
very much a part of his personality that, given the option, if he could structure it elsewhere, he would probably prefer this one.
Yeah, because what was the strength behind that? Like, what was his ability to do that came from where? Not came from where, sorry. Like his ability does it, like says what about him? What kind of strength did he have? What kind of person was he that was communicated in this action?
He is very open and willing to talk. I mean, super intelligent, really knows his job well. Very impressive.
But that openness is kind of what allowed that conversation. Yeah. So just stepping back and doing like the clarity that we do through connection, like that question of like, how do we get these yearly, events to not be, these catastrophic, like, either ors. Like you outlined one thing that both the person putting into it and both the manager and the employee can do. What were the two things in there? Like your part was?
My part was coming in intending or bringing it in with a little bit more lighthearted perspective.
And his was about coming in with that openness.
Yeah.
Right.
I would
and
say.
So in those moments, what were you both doing for each other?
Ian, I would say that we'd be making it easier to have a conversation.
Yeah. So for me, my neuroscience brain here is safety, right? Like we were creating safety and we were creating opportunity by having it easy to be able to share the difficult things or the hard things. And it was a conscious effort on both of your parts. So I think in that, like in unpacking that, like that clarity just in your experience, there's some answers that I think really align to, how we would look at this in a more functional or in a more, if I was looking at it as an assessment, like if somebody came and approached me with that question as a manager or something of that nature, that safety, right? The question is, where are there opportunities to create safety and make it easier for us to talk about the things that matter? And how can we build that into, again, using your story, how can we build that into consistent interactions? Because that's what you had said at the beginning, right? Like how we interacted with more and more. The reason I think it's important to unpack it that way is that, like, and if you're listening to this, outside of Ken or that, like, is if I come in and say, here is a way you create, use connection to create feedback in your organization, before I hear the story that you just outlined, right? If I was approaching you, Ken, and you were still working there and you would approach me and said, how can I do this? And I didn't get the clarity on how you've already done it, how your manager's already done it, what it means, what it looks like, then I'm leaving so much, like I'm going to do extra work for no reason. I'm putting extra work on you for no reason. And what I've done is actually went into the feedback part without the clarity part, right? Just like we talked about in the beginning, feedback needs an agreed upon goal and what that looks like. And then the other person asked for it. But oftentimes the other person asked for it, just like you did. And it's really easy for us to go right into giving it without the clarity. And so the clarity we created is what you're talking about is how do we create more safety? Right?
Yeah.
There are certainly different plans for how you can change these meetings and what things you can do, and plenty of practices that we have on Connection that can help you read that. But the more we understand, like the more you're able to see, boy, we created safety. What you're really asking is how can we do more of that?
Yeah. Right.
And I think that, when you think about this, anybody that's listening, think about it in your own, situation, if you will. Yeah, like what is it that you're being able to clarify what you're really wanting to build, right? Is harder than it sounds. And it always starts with clarifying where you've already had it, right?
Right.
And sometimes you're doing both at the same time, right? I want to have this. Where have I had it before? And that was similar in Jen's conversation earlier as well. Of like, okay, we want the sponge to be put away. Okay, let's start with when was it actually put away, right? Where most of our focus is, like, let's talk about the times that it's not happening, being the sponge, and let's talk about all the crappy feedback sessions we have when we're thinking about the annual reviews, and in those cases we end up with plans that are about like changing everything, right? Yeah. Like getting some expert's opinion on how we're supposed to do feedback, and overlooking the fact that like actually we've been doing feedback pretty well and we have some of the answers already. And the same with, how do we get the other person to pick up their messes versus where is that happening already and how can we do it more? I'm curious, what was your take on this conversation, the clarity you found through this?
I think that it's helpful to have kind of done or walked through the conversation and done that review of the review, if you will, to your point in finding out where I've experienced it before. And then that at least is insight for me, both strengths on my end and his end. And after this, I'm actually going to shoot him a text and say, hey, this is what I learned. So just as a way to encourage him, I mean, because he really has been a fantastic supervisor, or had been. So that's definitely encouraging. And then the additional encouragement of that path, kind of the finding blueberries thing of, yeah, where have you seen it before? As an entrance point to having this conversation with others about it. So all that's helpful.
And I have one kind of additional question that before we have Jen and Ren come back up here and kind of reflect on the day. When you think about that ability to create safety through humor, how do you see that in your coaching? Or where does that potentially show up in your coaching? Now, for those who don't know, I know Ken, he has a coaching practice, and he, it's just kind of kicking it off in the last 4 or 5 months. And so, Mike, I'm curious that like the same thing that you did to create good interactions with your manager, I wonder if you're like, if I asked you like where that is or could show up in your coaching, what your thoughts are.
It shows up most as recognizing that the end of the world is not nigh. The world is not going to spin off its axis, regardless of whatever the things are that we're digging into. And so there's grace there. And so that also means that means that there's space for finding the humor in it, even in the last conversation about sponges, right? No doubt the sponge at times has felt like the world is going to fall off its axis when tensions get tight, but bringing back the humor allows for dissipating some of that, and then allows for the space to further explore. So even in my evaluations, when I've received them, when there has been the need for the tough conversations coming back at me, if we can laugh about some of those areas of improvement that I need to do, that makes it a little bit easier to work through.
And what's interesting about that for me, as I hear you say it, is this idea, like when I just asked you that question, where do you see it applying? My head was going into like, where do you see it applying in your coaching relationships? And yours was actually about like applying it into your kind of own self-feedback, right? Like, hey, I can be humorous about why the humor, and provide that perspective for yourself. And I point that out, number one, because I think it's really interesting and insightful. But number two, from the standpoint of like, when we hear each other's experience like this, right, that each of us are approaching it from a slightly different lens, right? I just heard Ken's story about using humor, and my brain went into, okay, how do I prime a client relationship with that? Or how do I prime a conversation, perhaps even with my spouse, and in that avenue of like giving feedback, right? And yet the story that Ken just shared for him applied to, how can I apply that to myself? And that's the real value of the clarity that we seek together, is that like when we provide advice directly, right, it can hit or miss. When we share the experience, when we find clarity in the story, we each leave with different pieces of advice, with different ideas. And to kind of reinforce that, I'm gonna bring Jen and Ren back up on the stage, just kind of like hear how they reflected on your story. What was the clarity that they might have found in listening to your story, or their perspective. Yeah. Jen, what do you got? What clarity might you have found in Ken's story?
It feels like such an easy thing to bring humor to the situation. Gosh, how many times does humor help, right? And so in hearing your story, I was feeling like, wow, there's a lot of opportunity with that. And the fact that you and I both had the answers in the question, like we'd already figured out a big part of what we were asking about. And I think that that's a takeaway for me in your conversation with Brian today. Like, that's what I'm feeling. So.
Yeah. Ren, how about you?
I mean, I think, Brian, that this is the topic that I could stand on a soapbox for like 2 hours and give a TED talk on, right? So it was really fun to see you walk Ken through that and figure out how to divine what's already working rather than jumping straight into sofa. And then finding Ken land on humor. And even in his answer, I think, it felt very Monty Python of like, the end of the world is not nigh. I think, Brian, you're right. Like, his answer didn't only directly answer your question of where it shows up in his coaching. Like, it's clear that Ken fully embodies the idea of humor as a way to move through the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a couple of things on like the conversation in and of itself, like the challenge it is not to, when Ken came on and had the question of like, where does this go? Like, and I'm curious with Ren and Jen, you can raise your hand to answer this, like, and especially Ren on this one, like when he came, like, how can you set this up? How many answers did y'all have for him in your head?
So many.
Yeah. Ren is likely still writing out a plan for Ken, right? Like, to answer that, like,
I'll send it to him.
Right, and send you the whole, yeah. And I want to point that out for two reasons. Number one, it's there's nothing wrong with that. That's inherent, and it's inherent because what we want to do is provide value. Yeah, but that immediate answer is kind of like, we want to eat too, right? And like, if a Butterfinger is, like if I'm hungry, a Butterfinger will make me less of a jerk, right? There's whole Snickers commercials about that, right? But long term, it doesn't necessarily give me what I'm looking for, right? Which is that like health. And I point that out for two reasons. If I go directly with an answer to Ken might appreciate the answer, like the answer. But if I do this approach, where have we had it before? What does it look like? Getting the clarity. Which one's more likely going to lead to behavior change?
Definitely.
Which one is Ken more likely to actually like remember after tomorrow?
The second one, because the first one is like you just looked at the back of the book for the answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And how much do you appreciate that? You don't, because it's like there's the answer. You know?
And the outline is similar. If I go to the Snickers all the time, I'm costing myself time later, right? And if I, forego the Snickers to some, I don't know, protein shake, something. This isn't my avenue. This is a place I have to work, right? Like the eating healthy. I hear my wife like, "Where's your vegetables?" Anyway, but like if I do the vegetables, if I do the hard thing, then I'm actually saving myself time. If in this case the goal is clear, here's what I'm trying to do more, right? And that's when we get in the conversation, like what are you actually looking for here? And even if the person can't say it, starting with where have you had it before, like as Ken did, here's a challenge. Okay, where have you done something like this before? Now can help us understand what it is we're trying to do, but now we also have this much healthier idea, right, of how we're going to do it. And if Ken were to come to me next week and talk about like, oh, I'm having trouble giving feedback to this person, or like, where am I going to start? I'm going to start with where are you using humor? Where are you showing up to build trust? How are you creating safety? If I just gave Ken the answer, here's how you do it, and had Ren go create the 5-page right outline, then the only thing I'm going to say is, did you follow the thing? Right? Did you do what I said to do? And now I've created more time. Now I'm going to have the conversation again and again. Yeah. And that's also similar to, our conversation at the beginning, Jen, because like when somebody says, like I'm trying to get my, spouse to stop doing this, right? Or I'm trying to build, right, trust with working relationships. How do you do it? It's easy to provide answers, right? But the fact that but being able to slow down and walk through, hey, how did you actually put the sponge away, which seems almost ridiculous, but in understanding how you've done it, we set the basis for how we can do it again. And in the same with your husband, but also the same with how you had built that, really safe relationship with your coworker, right? Like if we would have stopped on like, oh, I've been friends with a long time, then we leave with, well, you and Ren can start hanging out, and in 15 years, she can give you feedback. You just have to hang out. Yeah. And what happens is we don't see clearly the things we're already doing. And we instead chase things we think we want to do or need to do, and we waste a whole lot of time because we're getting that short-term Snickers or Butterfingers. Yeah. Let's do some closing thoughts, and then I'll do closing thoughts and wrap this up. But I'll go in order of appearance. Ren, what do you got for closing thoughts today?
I mean, I think just the clarity above all else is what will get you to the end faster.
Jen, how about you?
I think the thing that keeps coming up in this conversation, and it's part of my closing thought, is that when you're approaching a problem, the first thing you should do is think, how have I tackled something like this before and been successful?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. Ken, how about you?
Two points. One is, as Jen had mentioned, kind of following how you've experienced it before, and then we can talk about how to branch out from there. So that's number one. And then number two is just impressed by Brian in that you get 3 people with names that kind of rhyme on your show. So that's
I'd like to tell you that was planned. It was absolutely not planned, but
I think that's a decade in the making. So well done.
Yeah. Does Brian count? Like it's all 4 of us? Brian, Ren, Jen.
Yeah,
we'll stretch it. Yeah,
we'll give it to you.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I want to thank you all. I want to thank Ren for showing up and helping build and put this whole thing together. Jen, I appreciate you kind of planning, coming with the feedback conversation, which is stuff to start with and engaging and having fun. And then Ken, thank you for bringing the idea about how we do feedback and then being open to engaging the Finding Good conversation. It's your all stories that make this podcast good. It's your stories that we're hoping to bring out to the world so that people can believe in their stories as well. So I'm going to kick you all off the stage, but feel free to hang out in the room. When we shut off, we can chat more if you like. But again, just want to say thank you to, again, Ren and Jen and Ken, and the different ideas that we talked about today really circulate around this idea that like feedback perhaps is, as we used the analogy before, that Snickers bar that we're looking for, right? It's a shortcut of if I want somebody to improve on this, and they've even asked me for how they can improve. And so I've got these answers right now, and it feels really good in that moment to give that value. But that value is a bit like that short-term sugar, right? Like, because every one of us have given feedback, have given advice, even to people who, right, honestly asked for it. We're consciously looking for it, only to have that feedback not heard, not followed, and or worst case, actually thrown right back in our face with the person pushing back or being frustrated. I think what was unique in all of the conversations was the idea of that, like, the feedback worked best when safety was there. And that the more we're able to create safety first, the more feedback has a place to land. And as we discovered, I think in all of the conversations, that the more clarity you create, the less feedback is actually needed. Because so much of the answer that Ken was looking for on the outside problem was found in the story. And for Jen to recreate that feedback or even have different strategies for going back home was found in clarity in the story. And that brings back to this whole idea of finding good. That the learning, that the insights, that the inspiration we're looking for is absolutely available in the stories of the people around us. What we've done is we've gotten out of practice in engaging those stories and knowing what to look for in those stories, and in approaching the stories as entertainment versus opportunities for clarity and insight that helps us have clarity and insight in our own because of the work we're doing to help somebody articulate what they've done, how they've done it, why it mattered, so that we can identify how we can do it again. If we don't know that story, if we don't have clarity of that story, we're simply costing ourselves more time. We're simply removing potential strengths and advantages that are literally sitting right in front of us that are free to access. And the trouble with that is then we become less capable of fighting the challenges that are in front of us, and we often feel more isolated in addressing those challenges. And that's a real secret behind connection, is that we cannot overcome every challenge in front of us alone, but there is not a single challenge in front of us that we can't overcome together. I want to thank you all for listening. I don't know if this is episode 5 or 6 or purple, but I want to thank you all for engaging. We will have this up on YouTube. Please look at findinggood.com on Friday. We will be having another well call, so it will be open to the public. Anybody that wants to join, feel free to go on the site and you can click on and join it at time or add it to your calendar in there. We'll be updating and improving that as well. A couple of really good conversations Tuesday and Friday of next week again that you can see on the site. My name is Brian Fretwell. Work at findinggood.com. Feel free to reach out for anything about connection, and hope you all enjoyed today and hope to see you in the next Finding Good podcast. Take care.